Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties Radio, Season 6, Episode 16. My name is Lee. I'm in WA. Of course, with me is Vikas.
Hey, hey! It's
So,
very windy and cold here.
it is quite nice here in Perth, actually. It's been a nice sunny winter's day, so it's not too bad right now. Um,
Oh well, it's currently 0 degrees.
oh, really? Wow, okay, that is...
That explains why it's so cold.
Yeah,
And
that,
and
yeah, that would explain it. I think that's...
I
You
was
know,
just like, it's 0 degrees, and we've got
I wonder...
31.5k winds
Yeah,
outside.
yeah.
So
I wonder what the source of this coldness is. Would it be that it's zero?
no,
Um,
no, no. I'm pretty sure someone watching this is going to go. I'm sure we've got left libertarians here, but like, the occasional lefty that we've actually got watching going like, mate, it's just climate change. And I'm there going like, it happens every July around this
Yeah.
year. I prefer to call it winter, but sure, you can call it
Well,
climate
see,
change.
I've got friends when I went to Canada for 6 weeks. I've got friends who basically did to me what we Australians do to Poms when they complain about like 30-degree weather, because like in Ottawa it gets down like to -30 with with chill. It's like it's a little bit colder than it gets at least in Western Australia. So yeah. Anyway, away from cold weather onto hot topics. Yes,
Nice segue.
I was looking for that one. All right. We're going to briefly go over the new Indigenous Affairs Minister's call for constitutional recognition of Indigenous Australians. We discussed this a couple of years ago. We had an interview with the someone who was promoting the statement from the heart, which is the Uluru Statement about having a advisory board, an advisory not panel, like Congress, I guess, for Parliament.
Yep. Indigenous voice for Parliament
Indigenous
is what
voice.
they were saying.
That's the phrase they use. So we're going to go over that. We're also then going to talk about the AFP rating journalists and potentially charging journalists over receiving.
Well, we talked about the AFP raids last time. I think we're talking about the potential charging of journalists
Yes,
now.
yes, specifically, yeah. So specifically, the notion that the journalists will be charged for receiving the documents that were given to them. So let's go over the Indigenous voice to Parliament. So Ken White is the newly instated Indigenous Affairs Minister. He's an Aboriginal man from Western Australia, and he has explicitly backed a call for constitutional recognition, saying there will be a referendum in the next few years. This has sort of brought back calls for an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Because why don't you summarise your views on this? Because I think we're both in a similar position that we were, a couple of years ago when we had.
Yeah. So I remember when we covered that. So there is the point. So historically, the funny thing about this is, despite the fact that this is coming from the more moderate faction within the Liberal Party, it's actually a viewpoint held that was first pursued by John Howard, of all people, and the Conservatives, basically because they kind of knew that a constitutional referendum would fail, and they just went like, okay, we'll push for that because we know it's going to fail, and then this issue will go away. It was originally... So the history of it is, in 1991, there was that great song by Yothu Yindi, which was...
Treaty.
Was it called? Treaty, yeah, Treaty. And that was written by him and Paul Kelly. And look, it started the conversation where they wanted a treaty similar to the Wangaratta Treaty in New Zealand, right? Which gave the Maori some political autonomy within the context of the New Zealand parliamentary system. So they've got like allocated seating, and allocated seating in Parliament. I believe.
In New Zealand, they have a certain number of seats. Yeah.
Yeah. So so they were kind of hinting that they should be doing the same thing here in Australia. I don't know how you're going to swing that. I mean, the difference there was the New Zealand people were the Maoris invited the British to help them hold the peace in New Zealand, hence a treaty, whereas we pretty much just invaded and enslaved the Aboriginal people. Yeah, just steamrolled through effectively. And look, as much as that's probably not a nice thing to say, the rules are a little bit different when that happens. And the thing is, while I have a lot of sympathy for Indigenous people, I don't necessarily think that this is the right way to go about it, because now you're asking people who weren't necessarily involved in it, and it's happened so far down the line, you're effectively forcing them to pay for the sins of people who are no longer involved in any decision making or basically anything to do with what happened in 1776, effectively.
Yeah. I mean,
So I
sure, keep going.
Yeah, no, I'm saying there's been a lot that's been built on top of it, on top of all of this, and you kind of want to sweep the rug out from it. And then I don't think necessarily that's going to deliver the outcomes that they want. Now, in terms of like a voice to Parliament, that has the problem, if I recall correctly. My memory is a little bit fuzzy. We probably should have watched that video before we did this. But I remember the major problem was effectively we lose all moral high ground of, like, basically Parliament if we start effectively doing intersectional politics about parliamentary representation, right? So as soon as we go down that route, the question then becomes, oh, hey, why can't the Chinese have their own representatives? Why can't they, why can't the Muslims have their own representative? Why can't the Christians? Like, you start dividing society up in so many ways. Eventually someone's going to go, why am I not appropriately represented in Parliament? Or rather, why don't I have extra representation in Parliament for my particular group? So there was that argument as to why you don't have separate special Senate seats for the Aboriginal specifically. Because, I mean, yeah, you can just say, okay, because they were first, they get to have that. But I wonder in a democracy how long that can possibly last.
Well, I mean, New Zealand arguably is a freer country than we are, and they have these things specifically prescribed into their parliament. So it's
but like I mentioned, there's a historical context that's different there. They keep in mind British rule was invited in New Zealand.
Yeah, which in some ways gives greater credence to a call to have Indigenous representation now, because they've never been given a say.
No,
and I mean. So I think like there is a worthy goal in this, which is protecting the interests of minorities. Like, I mean, one of the big differences maybe between New Zealand and Australia, I'd be interested to see what the percentages are, is that there's a lot less Indigenous Australians relative to the overall population compared to Maoris, and I guess to a certain extent related Pacific Islander groups, because it's not like Maoris were sort of beamed in from Mars. I imagine there's lots of Samoans and Tongans who culturally share a lot of heritage.
So
there is an element of, how do we protect the interests of a small group of very disadvantaged people, remote Indigenous Australians, the populations in sort of particularly northern Queensland, northern WA, and the Northern Territory.
Yeah.
How do you protect their interests in a big country governed from a central authority that's nowhere near them? I mean, I think that's a question. That's essentially a question
that's not just
to libertarians. In general,
that's not just a question for the Aboriginal people, though. I mean, Canberra is distant. I live in Canberra, and it's distant from a lot of places, but both culturally and physically. But like I said, I remember saying about on the last discussion we had on this, like going like, why don't we just do what the Americans and the Canadians did? Because their solution to this was, let's just ramp up their sovereignty. Right, let's let them actually.
It's true, and something we discussed quite heavily with David Allenson, who's the
and the point and the retort to that, it always comes back from people going like, oh no, the Crown can't give up sovereign land to the Aboriginals, and I go, why the fuck not? We already admitted we stole it from them.
Well, here's the thing: if you look at the experience of, particularly, I mean, I'm more familiar with sort of the Native
Canadian.
Americans, well, the Native American history. What happened was essentially said, yeah, we'll give you sovereignty, but then, oh yeah, we're just going to take it anyway. We don't give a fuck. Like, it became the point that essentially the US federal government became so powerful that it didn't matter that they'd given sovereignty to the Native Americans, because they just, whenever they wanted to take something from the Native Americans, they'd just take it, and there was no compensation. And they just marched them across lands and sent them to their deaths. And the Trailer is the great example of where they had been given sovereignty, and then Andrew Jackson rounded them up and pushed them across the country. And
I was actually referring to post Reconstruction sovereignty.
Sure.
Not the Andrew Jackson version. I'm talking about post Reconstruction.
Well, no. So theoretically, they had sovereignty prior to that, so they did have sovereignty. I mean, in some ways, they had sovereignty recognised by the British Crown all the way from the start. So one of the issues, even at the time of the Revolution, was that guys like George Washington wanted to take Native American lands, and the British Crown said, "No, you cannot take their land. We don't want to antagonize the tribes," and they went to war over it. So, that's I guess that's maybe a counterexample, a historical counterexample of like,
Yeah.
you can give sovereignty, but it's not a silver bullet. Like, in a world where the nation state has ultimate power,
Sure.
nominally granting sovereignty, and to be fair, like, you and I are on the same page with this. Like, we both think that Aboriginals should have the rights to their land. They should be given the ability to decide for themselves whether they're subject to Canberra. And I think the counterpoint to us is, well, it might not actually deliver all the things that we would ideally like to see happen. So
I'm actually 100% sure it won't deliver it,
Sure.
because mostly these lands that we're talking about are very, very, very rural, and unless the only real advantage I could ever see of these places ever sort of not dipping down into a third world status, right, with their people immediately leaving these sovereign territories to come back into Australia so that they can collect welfare, is if they could get their shit together and actually develop like competitive tax policies against Australia. And that's where the argument comes in from people going, oh, you think Australia will allow that to happen? I don't think Australia would ever allow someone to set up like an economic zone of Aboriginal sovereign territory in direct competition with Australia. Nobody would ever do that. Yeah, sorry, there's no way Canberra would ever allow that. And that's that to me. I think that's the only real counterpoint to my thing saying, "Hey, the Aboriginals should be allowed more sovereignty." Is that I doubt Canberra would allow them to compete directly.
Sure. I mean, I guess in a lot of these places that there's like that covers large areas. Like, particularly, I know in Western Australia, there's land councils that essentially, most mining companies, from what I understand, need to negotiate with these land councils for agreements to get permission to do what they do, and they cover huge swathes of territory, and there's a lot of mineral rights underneath them. So, like, sure, like, they're not going to necessarily be like the middle of Western Australia might not be a tourism hotspot, but like there could actually be the possibility of real economic development, through the use of mineral rights. But yes, like the issue. I mean, in some ways, the issue isn't necessarily with Canberra because it's going to go to. The issue is more with the population because it's going to go to a referendum. Like, it's. I mean, unfortunately, we don't live in a world where people can unilaterally declare independence of Canberra. As Western Australia proves, you can't just say, "Hey, we're going to have a vote to say let's."
Well, that's another thing, right? So the argument against a referendum for West Australian secession was that people pointed to the Constitution and said the Constitution says that this arrangement is indissoluble.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which means, in reality, the only way West Australia could actually separate from the rest of Australia is to fucking go to war with us.
Yes.
Right. But that's my point.
I mean, to be fair, right now might be a good time since the subs aren't built and the whatever the new planes haven't arrived yet. So now's the time, Western Australia, rise up and throw off your federal oppressors.
Yeah. So I mean, yes, that is an option. But so my point is basically every time someone the argument that's being put forward is, hey, put it into the Constitution. Yeah. I sit there and go like, okay, so that's worked out really bad for people.
Yeah.
And I can point. The best example is the indissoluble one, right? Where popular votes in states were basically, I think it was Queensland and West Australia, right?
No, Queensland joined Federation. So West Australia is not even mentioned in the Constitution, like the preamble, because we hadn't.
Oh, so it's just West Australia.
It's just West Australia, yeah. So we held off till like 1907 or like it was a couple of maybe 1903.
Right. So my point is where the popular will of the people was ignored because of something the Constitution said.
Yeah.
Another great example.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, so you talk about the referendum, that was 1933. But the thing with that was the government, at the same time they had the referendum in Western Australia, they had a regular election, state election, and the government changed, and the new government wasn't in favour of it. So in some ways it was never really resolved because basically the state government said, well, sucks to be us, and kind of did nothing about it. So that's another one. But anyway, that's an aside. Do you want to sort of? Yeah,
I was going to say, and I was going to say the other really good example is Section 44 of the Constitution. Do you think our original founders ever thought of Australia as being anything other than a British colony?
Yeah, sure.
No.
Yeah.
Right? But a High Court judge, basically, it's a bunch of High Court judges in 1994, I think it was. or was it 1999, basically determined that Britain was a foreign power for all intents and purposes.
Sure. Yeah.
Right? And now all of a sudden we've got scandal after scandal after scandal of effectively British citizens, Australian citizens who are British due to that nature, the historical nature between Australia and Britain. My favourite part about that is always
Including
that
this
it
guy,
looks
by the
like
way. I was a Briton, didn't even realise.
My favorite thing about that and this entire thing is for a country where out of all the founding fathers, only one voted against white Australia policy, right? So we know how they felt about non-whites running this country. Yeah, non-whites running this country. Indian and Chinese migrants are probably the only ones you can say for sure, right, will not violate Section 44. Because both of those countries do not allow dual citizenship.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Any capacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, Penny Wong's a good example of where she and Sam Dastyari, he's not in senator anymore, but they were just had to Iran and Malaysia same thing where they just read a stat deck saying, I get rid of my, I'm solely a citizen of Australia. End of story, because they can't actually get rid of their citizenship to Malaysia and Iran.
But I just wanted to laugh about that point one more. Can you imagine like Henry Parkes, Deakin, all of these guys, right? Because the only one who didn't was his name?
Pauline's no longer worried about you guys swamping the country. So that's fine.
She's worried if she can still keep her seat.
Yeah, that's it. That's what she needs to be worried about. Let's move on. Let's talk about Peter Dutton being an upstanding, wonderful, all-round good friend to...
I was going to say, it wasn't actually Peter Dutton. It was Kristen Porter. It was the Attorney General.
So basically what's going on is it's been in the media a lot of, questions of, is the AFP going to charge journalists for having received secret documents? So this is ongoing from the raids that happened, we previously talked about. Christian Porter has basically gone, nah, it's got nothing to do with me. AFP's under Homeland Security or Department of... Yeah, it is Homeland Security, isn't it?
AFP is just by itself. It's part
of Dutton's lot. And I can't remember what the name of his department is. Anyway, that dickhead.
His department is Homeland Security.
It is Homeland Security, which is just the dumbest name for anything. But anyway.
I was pretty sure the AFP fell under it Attorney General's department? No,
it's not. No, it's under Homeland Security. So Christian Porter, who's the Attorney General, just said nothing to do with me. I don't know anything about it. And Peter Dutton said, if you break the law, you no one's above the law. That's what he said, which is just.
Oh yeah, I saw this morning. Home
Affairs. That's what it is.
Home Affairs, yeah. So, okay, so he is technically right. Nobody is above the law, but I mean that's a statement that goes without being said, right? It's just like yes, nobody's above the law, including Peter Dutton.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sitting there and going like, I'm not a lawyer, but I was pretty sure, right? This is two lay non-lawyers basically going like. Our understanding of this is, yes, that is true. Nobody's above the law. And with national security legislation and stuff like that, the burden's the same, right? Mm. It's always beyond the shadow of a doubt. But like in terms of what the prosecutor, or rather what the judge will let them bring before them, because there's a test, right? The public interest test.
Yes. Yep.
Right? Now, I would imagine the public interest test for a normal person is way up here, right? Like if you want that exemption, you got to be all the way up here, right? Because you're not really pushing it out to the public, right? You're pushing it out to a few mates, maybe. You just don't have the reach to get it out there. You're not really a journalist. You're not known as a journalist, right? But the public interest test for a journo is probably like all the way down here, right? And the idea being like judges would very rarely entertain such cases being brought before them. Like the only reason they would entertain it is like, okay, there's clearly been a big breach, right? And there was information that compromised operations, that compromised Australian assets, right? Things like that. I would expect things like that are covered, right? And I would expect an organization like the ABC would be very sensitive before they published a story. I mean, WikiLeaks, sure, they just publish it. Yeah, but the ABC...
That was one of the big differences between how... what's his name?
Assange?
Yeah, Assange did it, and a guy in Russia,
Snowden?
Snowden, yeah. So Snowden gave documents to Glenn Greenwald and a bunch of journalists who then vetted and they took out
Sanitized
sources.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is that's how journalist organizations do it.
Yeah. So they sanitize. They're keenly aware that when they release it, they don't want to compromise the things that are actually happening for national security purposes.
Yeah.
Right. So, which is why it takes them longer to put these things out. Now,
which, by the way, like both in the examples, both of these news articles that were published did not involve any kind of active, ongoing investigations. It was that the AFP or the government wanted greater spying powers, and that there was an investigation into war crimes. So neither of these things involve any kind of pressing. It's not like the guy with the nuke is being chased and they're going to release that. No, this is two things which have really. I mean, there's no sensitivity to them in terms of timing or operational security. It's really they're investigating just the mere fact that somebody's dared to let the public know what the hell's going on in the government.
Yeah, exactly. So my point is there, like I sit there and I was going like, how has this gone to the point where a prosecutor is comfortable enough to think they can actually charge Jono? So I'm stupidly curious, going like, what exactly do they have on this Jono? What did he do exactly? And I can't think of it. I'm struggling to think of a scenario in which feel free to correct me in the comments of this thing, going like, oh no, this journal has been charged this time, blah 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 blah. Feel free to give us context of where this has happened. But I don't think it's ever happened in Australia. So if it does happen, I'm really curious as to what they got him on.
I mean, I think there's. So from my understanding, my limited understanding of the law, I think there probably is the capacity to charge these journalists, but it might be, as we sort of talked about, there is a public interest test that maybe isn't in the legislation. It's just kind of, it's common law. These things have evolved over time. But yes, it's I'm definitely very much on the side of these. I mean, really, I actually think that no one should really be charged for receiving secret documents as long as they're acting in good faith. So, handing people organizing to hand documents to the Ruskies. Okay, maybe you have a cause to charge people for doing that sort of thing. But I think there shouldn't only be exclusions for journalists for receiving these documents. I think anybody should be able to receive these documents as long as they're not acting with any sort of nefarious purpose. But we don't live in the world that I want to live in. So.
Yeah, I mean that's another thing. Look, I'm pretty sure that the way. Okay, so what you're describing is probably how it actually works, because I mean, I've heard you hear about data breaches all the time here in Canberra, right? I'm yet to see a large number of people actually getting arrested for receiving the data. I actually suspect it works the way that you're describing it, but the legislation is written so that if you take it, right, the point is basically people who receive stuff by accident are probably more likely to report it because they think they might get charged. I think that's what that's there to encourage.
Hang on, say that again.
So I think the way the legislation is written is there to encourage people who accidentally receive things to report it.
Oh, okay, I see.
Yeah, because like I said, we hear about data breaches here in Canberra, like the Canberra Times. You can do a search; it's littered with data breach articles.
Yeah.
There's at least one a year, and this is why you should oppose things like metadata retention, people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll hear about it in the news all the time, but I'm living in Canberra, I'm yet to hear about, oh, did you hear about these public servants from here who received all this data accidentally getting charged?
Yeah.
I'm sure they can be charged, but I don't think they actually get charged.
Yeah, sure. I'm just trying to pull up the bit of legislation, which this
is.
God, these things have to be so fucking...
No, I'm saying I suspect the way it's written, the way you describe it, is to encourage that activity.
Yeah, possibly.
Or I might be completely wrong, and someone's going to post going these public servants were charged just for receiving data, and I'd just be there going well, I guess I'm totally wrong.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they are criminal cases. There's no reason for them to be reported, right? So, like, just because I hear about the thing and then I don't see anything about that breach for years on end, doesn't mean nobody got charged with it. Oh, sorry, nobody got charged for receiving data.
True. Yep, that is true. Um, well, do we have any final thoughts before we sort of wrap things up? I mean, we've finished a little bit earlier than we normally do.
Oh, well, yeah. We could talk about something else.
What do you want to talk about? Go raid the cultural war zone, Vikas. Let's talk about something which I would normally not talk about. So, what's something that's got something? What is something that's got your goat this week?
Yeah. Can I just say the whole Tommy Robinson thing is fucking bullshit.
Right. Sure. Okay. So
Yeah.
Tommy Robinson has allegedly applied for. This is so stupid.
He hasn't allegedly. He has actually applied for it.
He's actually applied for asylum, political asylum in the US. God,
I know.
Jesus.
I sat there going like, mate, you ran for parliament.
Yeah.
Right? And after you lost, it wasn't like you were imprisoned or anything like that, right?
He's not. What's the guy from Malaysia? The who was perpetually being charged. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah. So I sit there and going like, this is one of those things which I'm sure probably appeals to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because he's like, oh yeah, he's an anti-immigration person. Yeah, okay. It's probably down, my type of person. But this is just stupid.
Yeah.
I'm just there going like, that's just he's well and truly jumped the shark now. Like.
The people who love his shit, he's gonna lap it up. That's the thing. Like, he's not a serious person. He's not. He's a performer.
I have sympathy. I have sympathy for Tommy Robinson to the extent that I think he should be allowed to speak, right? Because I just find he's this type of person who he does the most damage to his own cause, right? Nobody would be talking about Tommy Robinson if they hadn't basically stuck him in contempt of court.
Yep.
Right? None of us would be talking about him.
Yep.
Right? Just because he doesn't have anything interesting to say. He just hates Muslims. That's it.
Sure.
Right? He's just the angry man shouting against the mosque.
Yep, sure.
Right? But when you silence him, right, the few salient points he makes.
Silence him. Let's just be clear. He talked an awful lot. About all of this stuff, even while he was supposedly silenced. So,
no, he was talking. No. All of the stuff was before he started talking. Sorry, before he got silenced, and then after all those suppression orders were released, then he started talking. You're right. There's a very small gap in which he was actually silenced.
Sure. Yeah. So and he was free to talk about the nature of that. He was like, it wasn't like he couldn't say anything. He just could talk about a very specific topic.
Yeah.
Which isn't to say I'm sympathetic for gag orders, but like, just these things are often overhyped, like compared to actual places where people actually get silenced by the government, like where they get.
But I actually like that. I actually like that about our society, and the reason why.
That whiny assholes like to overdo things.
Okay, so I actually like that about our society, and the reason why is because what that indicates is the threshold for free, like the actual level of speech, is very free. And so if the tiniest bit, if we're losing just an inch, the fact that we're crying about it is probably a good thing.
That I would agree with. That's
yeah. So like I'm happy with that. But like I said, until that gag order went into place, nobody fucking cared.
Sure.
Right? And this is one of those things, like I just go like Tommy Robinson, Milo Yiannopoulos, Laura Loomer, right? All of these people that they go like are part of the, this right-wing, what do they call them? The right-wing conspiratorial group or whatever? I don't know what the name for.
I don't know.
They're not the intellectual dark web because that's that's Dave Rubin and all those people. I don't know what this group is, but they call them like hate mongers or hate speech people or whatever it is. And I sit there going like, here's the thing. You let them talk, right, for 30 minutes, I guarantee you nobody's going to listen to them again.
Yeah, sure. Yep. But the nature... So this is the thing where the opposing side, they live for this stuff. That's the thing. Like, this is one of the reasons why I so hate the culture war. Like, I just hate it with every fiber of my being, is that it exists for one group of people to hate another group of people to justify their existence. So, like, the people who argue against Milo, the people who argue against Tommy Robinson, their own existence is justified by the existence of Milo. Like, it's a mutual dependency for both sides, where both sides have nothing of value to say.
I don't think that's true.
Other people are evil, and so that it fuels their self-righteousness, it fuels their hate.
No, so I don't think that's true, because I think that's true for Tommy Robinson. I think that's true for Milo Yiannopoulos. I think that's true for all these right-wing people. They only exist because of the Antifa and all of these far left sort of, Hope Not Hate and all these other groups.
Yeah.
Right? Effectively smear merchants and, people pushing a very left-wing agenda, right? And the reason why I believe that that's true for the right-wing people, that they wouldn't exist without these left-wing people, is because the left-wing groups have existed a lot longer than these people, right? And they've existed long before these people came around.
Yeah.
Right? And they were targeting effectively mainstream conservatives, right? For mainstream conservative values, right? Like, hey, let's cut taxes. That was getting attacked, right? And that's what's kind of spawned the Milos and spawned these right-wing culture warriors.
I remember the classic one for me when I think about that sort of thing was
Media Matters.
No. Joss Whedon. When Mitt Romney was running for president, he put out this video talking about gotta vote against Mitt Romney because otherwise the zombie apocalypse will happen. And it's like, okay, I mean, I obviously don't like Mitt Romney. I didn't like anything on his platform, but to it's essentially boy cries wolf. Eventually, if you say every single person who you are against is a racist piece of shit, then when actual racist pieces of shit come along, you're not going to have anything to say. Like, you're going to lose.
Precisely.
Yeah. So, I agree with you that obviously a lot of these organizations existed before. Like, The Guardian existed before Milo Yiannopoulos, but these people always need new enemies. It's it becomes both sides provide the fuel for the self-righteousness to continue.
How though? I sit there going they were picking on they were just they weren't picking on the far right people, right? They picked on anyone who held any position that was to the right of Stalin, and said you're a fascist Nazi.
Okay, yeah, totally agree. But when these new people come along, they become the new targets of hate. It's not, it's novelty. We're not arguing about the same stuff. I mean, in some ways, it doesn't really matter.
I guess what I'm saying is I disagree with your thing that that both sides exist to fuel each other. I think that it's become that way now. And it's become that way because of the Yiannopoulos and Robinson types, right? If you take a look at it, all that those people appearing have done is now basically make it so that the crazies on the left actually have crazies on the right to fight against, right?
I mean, Alan Jones existed before. I mean, the shock jock in Australia, the grand right-wing boogeymen were Alan Jones and John Laws. In the US, it was, Rush Limbaugh. And and I guess Glenn Beck was another one. A little not that long ago.
Yeah, but would you say that? But how crazy would you say they were?
Well, sure, they weren't as crazy. But then again, the left wasn't that crazy either. Not compared.
I don't know. Antifa's been doing public violence on the streets for. Oh shit! Am I getting disconnected?
Are you? I don't know if you are. Vikas, can you hear me? Oh well, we're running out of time anyway. Oh well.
Huh.
Vikas is. Yeah. Vikas, can you hear me? Okay, Vikas can't hear me. We'll just leave it there. So thanks everybody for joining us. We'll be back to talk about these things again next week.